Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar. My name's Avril Townsend.
And I'm Gary Talbot.
And this evening we've got a webinar for you which is going to look at planning with purpose to reduce workload and to help retain happy staff. So if you're a teacher yourself, obviously everybody's keen to try and reduce workload for our mental health and well-being, but also if you're a leader, it's really important to make sure that we retain and keep all our staff very happy. So this evening we've got Robert Powell with us, who's our guest speaker. So I'll just hand you over to Robert.
Good evening, everybody. Can I just welcome you? If you just use the chat very briefly and just tell us where you're from, please. It'd be nice just to put what part of the world or what part of the UK you're from. It'd be very useful.
We've got someone from Dundee, Rob, North Tyneside, Glasgow, Shrewsbury, Wales, Edinburgh, Bedfordshire, Nottinghamshire, Glasgow, Manchester, London, Stoke-on-Trent.
My part of the world.
Paisley. Belfast. Got people from all over the UK, it seems.
Okay, if I carry on then.
Yeah.
Can I just introduce myself? I'm actually, I started teaching in 1973. That's probably before many of you were born. And actually, I put on the slide there, Rosler. That was the year that in the UK, they raised the school leaving age from 15 to 16. And I was actually doing teaching practice 1972-3 at this school when the head called me to his office and said, would you like to stay as a teacher? And I was delighted that they invited me. And I said, what am I teaching? And he said, the Rosler class. These are the 15-year-olds who've just been told in assembly they can't leave. They've got to stay on for another year. So I actually went white and he said, don't worry. He said, it'll be a very high profile job. In fact, you'll have your own minibus. And I said, what's the minibus for? He said, to get them out. And I said, where? He said, I don't really mind, just get them out. And it was ever so interesting. We didn't have Ofsted in those days, the inspection. We used to have HMI visits. And every time HMI planned to visit, I would be in the minibus with the 16. And as the car came up the drive from the HMI, I would drive down the other way with the 16 young people in the minibus until the inspectors had left. I actually have served as a head of department, a head of year, assistant head, deputy, and a head teacher of a school in Stoke-on-Trent, which actually, when I took over, just been inspected by Ofsted, and 33% of lessons had failed. In those days, they called it unsatisfactory, but 33% of the lessons had actually failed. And I'm delighted that actually over the years I was there, we improved dramatically. And in the last year of the 5 A to C's GCSEs, the school scored 75% in English and in maths under its new head, Mark Stanier, who's absolutely was my head of maths. And in fact, they've still got 55% free school meals. It's one of the highest scoring white urban schools in the country. And I'm very proud that I was there for the beginning of that change. Since then, I've been a training consultant and publisher and a Commissar Robert Powell training. I've done 2,000 inset days all over the country and abroad with primary, secondary, middle, and sixth form colleges, FE colleges. And I've written about 10 books, including the most recent one on live feedback. Actually, the most recent book, okay, is feedback I'll get to in a second, but the interest, this particular tonight on the planning, I'm going to start off with a problem. And can I just reassure you that actually most of it this evening is going to be the strategies. And I'm going to do 2 lots in detail, and it's full of practical ideas for the classroom. My inset background of doing inset with schools is that teachers don't want the theory. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the evidence or the theory. I'm going straight into the examples of how it can actually change the way we plan. The book actually came out in January, and there's one chapter, Reducing Teacher Workload in Lesson Planning, and we're actually doing that this evening. It's a more detailed version of what's in the book, and I believe we're doing another webinar in a few weeks' time on reducing the marking workload. So, but this is the chapter for tonight, which we're focusing on, and I'm giving you far more examples tonight than are in the book. I'm also at some point going to show you actually how planning on the back of an envelope is actually perfectly acceptable and perfectly manageable.
Rob, just 1 second, sorry to stop you. The PowerPoint stopped sharing, so you might just have to reshare the PowerPoint screen.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, just share your screen again. There we go, we're back on.
Apologies for that, everybody. It's technical. This is actually an endangered animals unit in a primary school. And basically it's the back of an envelope planning. And what I'm going to try and do later is show you how you can work your way through so that that's the planning you do. There'll be other things you plan as well to go with it, like scaffolds and so on. But that's the basic thing that you can do if you adopt the kind of ideas I'm going to share this evening. The problem of retention, why do teachers leave? I actually think many leadership teams impose straitjackets on teachers. Okay, and I actually believe you come up with principles based on evidence, and then you produce strategies to meet those principles. There's a different world approaching. Now, many years ago, I think in Cornwall, in about 2010, I was invited to lead a day with all the schools from Cornwall. It was the 2 people who were invited from the school, the head of sixth form and the teaching and learning coordinator. But Cornwall also invited them to bring 2 A-level students with them. So we ended up with 150 people, half of whom were A-level students. And one of the questions in the afternoon, they asked me to do something I'd never done before, which was to get some volunteer students and actually sit down with them for half an hour and talk about what good teaching looks like. And we got some volunteers during the morning. Cornwall had sent their media department, so they filmed this. We've now got a DVD, a 40-minute DVD of 7 18-year-olds talking to me about what good teaching looks like. And one of the questions I asked them, I said, if you were actually asked by the head to actually help with planning an advert for a new teacher, what adjectives would be in the advert? And one of them said very clearly, very quickly, passionate. That's actually was music to my ears, because when I was a head, I always used to actually observe any candidates that came for interview in the school. And I always used to sit at the front of the room, not the back. And interesting, what I was looking at was not the teacher, I was looking at the students. I wanted to see the passion in the students' eyes because of what this teacher was doing. And I got a personal example is my own daughter, who was actually at 7, came home from her primary school. And she said to my wife and I, I'm going to be an archaeologist. And I said, why? And she said, we're doing Egypt. I just love Egypt. This wonderful, wonderful primary teacher who had this real passion for Egyptology. And she shared it. And now, you know, she's actually in her 40s now. She's actually the curator at the National History Museum for anthropology and human remains. And we owe that really to that wonderful teacher and her passion. And the problem we've got, okay, is that many people are having the passion kicked out of them. We've got major problems in the secondary sector in England. And I don't know, people will tell me on the chat maybe whether it's true in Wales and Scotland as well. But the interesting thing about it is that in secondary, there's a huge shortage of the scientists, model languages, and chemistry and maths. And many departments, including Gary's, I believe, and Averill's, have non-specialists. And also, of course, there's non-specialists within primary. If you've got to teach science or you've got to teach maths, you're not a specialist there. And an interesting thing from the point of view of the closing this gap for the disadvantaged students is that in many schools, it's a sad state of affairs, the actual lower sets are taught by the non-specialist or by the inexperienced or by the supply teachers who come in. So the gap gets wider. It's just to give you the facts here that there was basically, not counting people who've died, but people who've left for other reasons, 35,000 in 2008 is 11,000 more than 2011. So it is a major problem. I don't believe the problem's quite as stark as in primary, but basically in secondary it is. Another major problem is the newly qualified teachers. Allen and Sims, a fabulous book, basically pointed out that 40% of NQTs, newly qualified teachers who join the profession, have left, okay, having spent 2 years of their life training and a lot of money, publicly funded schools, they leave within 5 years. And the other thing they point out is actually we know that teaching quality improves with time. So we've got the sad state of affairs, the newly qualified enthusiastic teachers leaving within 5 years, losing that expertise, only probably to be replaced by new NQTs. In terms of the data analysis, the major thing with workload, which all the research tells us, is it's detailed marking, it's collecting a data and analysis, and it's planning. On the data side, one of the things I did was actually look at there's 200 national curriculum objectives, and you've got 32 pupils in a primary classroom, and you do 3 data drops a year. That's 20,000 or nearly 21,000 entries that staff have to do. Ross McGill, the teacher toolkit guy, in his book actually said that in one Northern Ireland school, they had to do three for each grading, had to have 3 levels, and ended up with 120,000 entries that teacher had to do in a year for his leadership team. In the survey in 2015 on why people were leaving, the DFE did this. Another thing that kept coming up all the time was the scrutiny and surveillance of the leadership team and lack of trust. And can I please say very clearly here, I'm not talking about all schools, because there'll be some people on this webinar tonight who work in wonderful schools with very supportive leadership who don't demand these kinds of things on you. Why this? The level of detail in planning is what the survey said. One respondent actually said we're not even allowed to share plans. We have to do our own. We can't share plans. I cannot understand the next one. This would be true for many of you listening tonight, is that the annotated seating plans. Secondary teachers, if they're facing an inspection, will be asked in many schools to actually draw a map of the room, name all the students, and annotate it, saying why they're sitting there and what their needs are. And I find that completely ludicrous, because if you actually know where your seating plan, you have a really good seating plan concept, how you seat them is very well thought through. The only important thing is that you know where they're sitting and why they're sitting there. The annotated seating plans are for outsiders, and the workload review group makes it quite clear that we shouldn't be producing annotated seating plans for visitors. The planning you do should be for the benefit of learners. And some schools are also reported that they're required to change their plans during the week in the light of experience. I actually just like you to read that quote. It's from a school in Birkenhead that I've worked with quite a lot. And interestingly, the head gave me this quote about what she says in her school on planning. Just read that quote very briefly. That school, okay, is actually in one of the most deprived areas of the Northwest. It's actually in Birkenhead. They could produce fantastic results. And she actually, it's true, I've been there and spent several days at the school, okay, and the staff, they plan their own lessons, they actually share planning, and it's actually a totally different school from the one I've been describing. What the workload group said about planning is it's not planning that we need to tackle, because good teachers will plan lessons, and I'll show you a way of doing it in a short time. But it's basically planning for accountability. What they say is that many plans are being actually designed for the leadership team. On Facebook recently, there was somebody who made a post at 11 o'clock at night, and she said, please help. She said, I'm actually still got 4 hours of planning to do before tomorrow morning, because I've got to get my lesson plans into my senior leadership by 9 o'clock. This was 11 o'clock at night. She still had 4 hours work, because actually the lesson plan was to be scrutinized by the leadership team. And this is actually goes against totally what the DFE workload report said. Can I just ask you on your chat, please, just to share with on chat now, just a few words or a phrase, the kinds of demands that you face in the school or college in which you work. And the second question then is how many, we're going to do a poll in a moment, but having done the chat, we'll then do a poll on how many hours a week you spend at home planning. So what kind of demands do you face first, please?
So we've got things like comments such as what went well and EBI on homework. Too much time spent filling paperwork for the sake of it. So if you're a new teacher, 2 hours of planning per lesson, I'm assuming on that one. Some people are saying they have to submit plans within 48 hours of the lesson. Again, someone said planning for accountability and tracking in more than one way is very time consuming. Lots of paperwork, new additions to lesson plans, e.g. having to put literacy on there, putting where the maths is, where they're tracking certain students. Significant amount of testing that takes place. Someone says that as part of a skit, they're usually spending a lot of time planning, 5 to 8 hours a day. All lesson plans are due 48 hours before and PowerPoints. Tracking of students again has come up, and writing WWEBI, writing written feedback.
Forgive me if you work in England, in Scotland or Wales, and this isn't an issue, but I've worked with enough schools in both countries to think it is an issue. It's not just an English problem. And I don't know whether there's anyone from around the world who's on tonight, whether there's actually a problem in the school. I know in the US, there's a lot, I've worked out there, that I know there's a lot of problems there with both testing and with planning. I'll move on anyway, but thank you for that contribution. The thing I also find out is that actually the lesson plans that many schools use, okay, are very similar. Is my screen still there, Gary?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you look at this, I've put a little comment here. Most of them have a starter. They actually have learning objectives, the targeted students linked to assessment objectives. And they seem to all have a plenary, and then they also have this little box called differentiation. Now, I've probably done 500, 600 training days on differentiation. And the conclusions we draw on the training is that differentiation is actually another word for outstanding teaching. Because every single aspect of your teaching actually has a differentiation issue, meeting the needs of individuals. The way you organize the groups, the displays you have on the walls, the way you actually use the right language, the way in which you use peer and self-assessment and get students helping each other, the way you use the TA in the classroom. There's so many things you might do to meet the needs of individuals. The idea of a little box like that is a nonsense. And I don't know why teacher training establishments still churn out student teachers with a little differentiation box. It's actually a tick box actually for the leadership to check that you've thought about it. And the reality is, it's if we were doing a healthy living plan and you've got a box called diet, somebody puts fiber in there, you haven't sorted your diet out by putting something in that box. And it's the same with differentiation. We shouldn't have a little box called differentiation. Differentiation be embedded in everything we do in the classroom. Yeah, this is another one. It looks a different look, but it's got the same thing: objectives, starter, main points, plenary, resources. Can I just ask people to think for a moment about starters? Now, it's ever so interesting. The starter began when actually during my time as a head, actually with Michael Barber, who was an advisor to Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister at the time. And he actually said there are children arriving in the classrooms, high as kites, they're climbing the walls. We need a settling down time, and the starter was born. And it's interesting, actually, the idea was actually is to get a nice focused start by getting the kids calmed down, a little starter. I've done the arithmetic on this, and if you do a 10-minute starter and a 10-minute plenary, and you actually do that in every lesson, say in a 25-period week in a secondary school, you've lost 2 years of teaching time in any 5-year period. And actually, interesting thing about it, there's no evidence anywhere in the world that the starters are beneficial. And the only evidence I've seen is actually where people use it for retrieval practice, which actually has a big impact on learning. And I can just, many schools do use it for retrieval practice. But there are schools I work with where teachers have said to me things like, my leadership team member watched me teach yesterday, said my lesson was fantastic. It couldn't be outstanding because I didn't use a plenary. And the nonsense about this is that actually, if you actually, for example, look at an English teacher reading a play, why don't we have our review at what we call a plenary at the point when you judge it, which actually might be halfway through lesson 2, because we've reached a point in the play where we can review. Why do we have a starter in an art lesson when all the students know what they're doing and they just want to get going? I've seen a teacher in Sheffield I was working with as a consultant, and the head asked me to watch a TNT teacher because they had some concerns about her teaching. And she did a starter and she lost the class with the starter because they were all making things and they actually wanted to get on. So she actually started getting irritated with them and telling them off. She lost the atmosphere simply because it was compulsory to have a starter. I asked the head at lunchtime, I said, I'm watching again this afternoon, can we dispense with the starter, please? He said, well, why? And I explained, and he said, let's just try it. And the lesson went like a dream. They came in, she got around the desk, she reminded them where they were, and then she spent the whole of the rest of the lesson walking around, supporting, having dialogue with them. Fabulous lesson. The starter was the problem. And I'm not against starters for people who think that actually helps and they've got a good idea for it and it's going to be useful. What I'm against is the compulsory nature of it. You must use a starter. It's interesting that they do it in different formats, every school, but they always seem to have the same. And my question is, why the fixed structure? Why one lesson? I would guess, I'm not going to do a poll on it, but I would guess that sort of 70–80% of the people actually on tonight on the webinar don't teach single lessons, they teach a series of lessons. And who is that lesson plan for? Is it actually to help the learners, or is it actually for the scrutiny of leadership? It's interesting that the DFE workload group on planning made it very clear. They said, do not plan single lessons, plan a sequence of lessons. Plan for learners, not external audiences. And they also said, which is really interesting, we shouldn't have a generic tool. Let subjects and phases decide the planning method. So early years will do things totally different from a year 6 in a primary. The lesson plan that you might have in PE will be totally different from the lesson plan you might have in a maths lesson or a science lesson. And they actually recommend totally. Now, the other thing which actually happens is Galton McBeath in 2008 did a study of the national curriculum reforms. And they actually said that basically that people come into teaching with spontaneity, fun, creativity, okay, and very quickly it's squashed out of them. They're saying the same thing as I am trying to promote this evening. And why I think there's a way forward is with principles. I think you can combine rigor with professional autonomy. And it's the principle that provides the rigor, in my view, and the method that the teacher uses to deliver that principle provides the autonomy. So if we look at the evidence-based principles, now in the book, and certainly this particular principle 1, teachers share the learning intentions with the class, so they're engaged, understand, and can picture their goals. That's actually, it's a free download this evening. If you go to my website, you can download. There's basically 8 principles in all, and principle 1 is full of ideas, which I'm going to take you through now. I'll always remember, by the way, those who are facing inspection, those from abroad who don't have inspection, you lucky things. Ofsted, Estin, Wales, I'm not sure what they're called in Scotland, but basically all the different countries have inspection systems. When I was at Head, we had inspection, and the first thing they always did when they went into a lesson was sat next to somebody and say, what are you doing? One of the science inspector came to see me at break time. He said, Mr. Powell, I was in one of your science lessons this morning, and I turned to a child and said, what are you doing? And they said, I think it's science. But my favorite was RE. Those people who are actually in school now teaching will know that the inspection is much smaller than it used to be. In those days, when I was ahead, we had 21 inspectors arrive for a week. And there was an inspector for every subject. And the interesting thing about it was that we only had one RE specialist, and she taught 600 kids a week. And this, because we had an RE inspector, she spent 17 lessons watching this RE teacher through the week. And actually one of the famous moments, which the school still will talk about, is the time when this inspector sat next to a very badly behaved young man and said, what are you doing? And the child said, I think it's RE. And at the end of the lesson, she turned and said, can you explain what we learned today? And he said, don't worry, I didn't listen either. So interesting is that actually you've got the Ofsted there after this question, are you all know what you're doing? And the review, the evidence I've used for why this is important is from these 4 areas. And I've put the references for these 4. I'm not going to go through the evidence tonight. Go and consult them because the evidence in all 4 of these organizations are superb. My point about it is that actually if you come up with a principle, that isn't a method, that is a principle, you can actually have the same principle but different choices how you do it. For example, A lot of teachers will use this. Strategy 1. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer the following questions. And what you actually have on the screen are the questions we're going to answer. Now, that is actually widely used. Okay, and it's rather like the learning objectives. I don't like the word objectives. I think it's very teacher word. And the point being, we're trying to get students, this is for them to understand what it is we're aiming at in this lesson or this series of lessons that follow. Strategy 2 is you ask the questions. Now, I have to confess, the example I'm about to show you from Victorian England was sent to me after doing an inset with the school. I did an inset with the school and I showed them the secondary example, which is on civil rights, which I'll show in a moment. And she said, I love that. We're going to do one on Victorians and I'll send it you. And what she sent to me, what they did, and this is the idea, is they researched Victorians and actually then put these into a PowerPoint, all these wonderful images. And then they said to the kids, I'm not telling you what the objectives of the lesson are today, what the learning intentions are. I want you to watch these slides now, and then I'm going to get you into groups for 2 or 3 minutes, and I want you and your partners to come up with a question on one of the pictures. And here's what they saw. The interesting thing about that is that the questions that came back, what was that slate thing, miss? Why was that those children playing on that machine in that factory? Why did the little boy have a label around his neck with a number? And all those questions that came from the students' curiosity were turned into, by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to answer the question. How did they actually write in schools in Victorian times? Why did children work in factories? And the interesting thing about it was that actually the curiosity of children was driving the objectives, so the learning intentions. Now, the one I showed to that school before they did that was actually the civil rights one. And the teacher in this lesson actually had a question mark on the whiteboard and said, I'm not telling you what we're learning today, please. I want you to watch this, and then you get into groups and you'll ask questions about the pictures that you've just seen. So actually 2 ways of showing how the lesson objectives are, the intentions. And the interesting thing about it is that you could do that in many other areas of the curriculum. The same kind of thing, visual, video, photographs, just getting students curious, raising questions, which we then explore in the following lessons. I've also seen other interesting ways of starting lessons. There's a piece of software which I was shown in a school in Birmingham called Crazy Talk. And I'll just show you what they did with it.
Good morning, Year 7. My name is Jimmy Oliver. You may have seen me on television. Thank you for inviting me to your school today. In this new topic, you're going to be able to plan and make a healthy meal. Before you can do that, however, in this lesson, we're going to reflect on your current eating habits and find out if they're healthy or not.
And the interesting thing about that is the Crazy Talk software. And the next example I'm going to show you isn't to do with lesson planning. It's simply to do, once you've got software like that in your school, the potential is huge. This one.
Hello, my name is Millie. I'm a King Charles Spaniel.
I'm a very posh dog because I am a pedigree. Not like some of the dogs round here. They're mongrels.
That was actually done for my neighbour, that was her dog, and actually it's 40 minutes long, and it's her favourite present for Christmas. I mean, Millie, actually, if you take that to a modern languages lesson and actually use Crazy Talk, you can ask students to, if you're doing animals as the theme in a foreign language lesson, then you're able to actually get each student taking their dog, their cat, their parrot, their fish, and actually using a photograph and actually creating a talk in the foreign language where you animate the face. So it's actually, once again, an example of how we can use technology to get students engaged at the beginning of a lesson. Excuse me, I'll just go back to the PowerPoints now. Now, basically, if you use that idea, excuse me, I'm going to go back. I've used it. I've got the endangered animals I'm going to show you later. I've done one for A-level sport, which actually is to training and sport. Done another history one on the slave trade. I've done one with healthy eating for a D&T department, which actually has Food Glorious Food from Oliver as the music. And I've got a Streets of London one I did for an A-level sociology class on social class. It's interesting that all of those are ways of engaging the students, creating the questions, which then form the basis for the lesson. Now, I'd like to do something else. I'd like you all, please, to have a go very quickly of reading this 3 paragraphs and seeing if you can answer the questions. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Please just read through and see if you can get the name of 2 Play-Dohs. Can I also on the chat now ask you to tell me, please, how you feel about that? When I did that in Inset in schools, I actually say to the staff, I'm going to pick on one of you in 1 minute's time. And the response is amazing. Can I ask you, please, just to tell us on the chat any feelings you had about reading that passage?
So we've got very confusing, someone said, Kylie said. Julia said panic, exclamation mark.
Thank you.
And Helen said confused. Skip to the next, Ross says. The fear, confused. I think people are kind of scared or nervous or confused about it or panicking.
I'm just going to go back up again. As you can read, it's possible to get get the right answers. Because if you read the first line, Skondo has often been described as one of the fountain-grown Play-Dohs in the United Kingdom. Skondo is the first one. Unfortunately, unlike Skondo, the Play-Doh of latex. So you can get 2 answers, 100% with no understanding. We call it in England the SATs. Can I just say that what you've got here, okay, is something, well, the reason I'm showing it is often the learning intention or objectives that are placed on screens or on flip charts for the staff to actually, for the children to actually observe, are full of technical terms that actually they don't understand. And Alex Quigley, who's now quite a high profile author, and he's also now working for the EEF, Education Endowment Foundation. Alex Quigley's article on literacy claims from the research that the EEF has conducted that 25% of 16-year-olds in our schools actually got the reading age of less than 12. And it's actually interesting that therefore, if I show you the next slide, can you look on the left-hand side? This was actually an FE college I was working with. The students were entry-level students. So these are students who are not even up to the level of a GCSE student. And it's aimed at the student. This is actually for the students. You will learn how the human respiratory, digestive and circulatory systems interact to maintain activity. And now, interestingly, if you read through that, an awful lot of students, the lady contributed earlier saying panic. This is exactly the problem that we've got. When I was actually head of department, I was head of learning support. And it's interesting, my TAs said to me that actually the problem that students face first when they read is they don't understand the words, they get anxious. So anxiety is the first thing because you don't know the words. And interestingly, we're in many schools, they're being encouraged to put this on a screen, this complicated language. I actually think another strategy you see is the big picture. And I actually prefer to say to students, we're going to find out about healthy eating. And we're starting off looking at a balanced diet. And here's some of the things we'll look at under balanced diet. Now, this is actually what we call dual coding, because the research on dual coding suggests actually our memory can actually work at two levels, from a text level or from pictures. And the beauty of actually having this particular diagram of our course means we're starting off with balance. We're going to look at drugs. We're then going to look at ill health, and we'll finish off with exercise. And the beauty of this is the other thing which you will find with many of you who actually get students to write extended writing, essays and so on, is that many students who are not confident don't know where to start. They have a real problem with starting an essay. They can't structure the essay. They got a blank sheet of paper, don't know where to go next. And if you actually work on this kind of plan, you've actually got 4 chapters: balanced diet, you've got drugs, we're looking at health and exercise. And then each of the mini branches represents a paragraph. So you create a structure where we have a chapter with paragraphs in each of these, and you can create a structure for writing or for planning a talk, for example, which actually is making use of a visual structure. Now, I find that much more useful, okay, than the original objectives written by the Further Education College. It was by the exam board. The other way of doing it is a strategy 6 in that chapter on principle 1 is the flip chart. And I'm actually convinced, you know, that having just a flip chart on the wall with actually, or can I just mention, please, the magic whiteboard, just in case people have not heard of it. If you go into a place like, if you go online and type in magic whiteboard, or go into Ryman's if you've got a store near you, they actually stock this. It's actually the same size as a flip chart, but it actually is a plasticky substance that sticks to the wall. And interesting, you can put those on the wall, okay, and next to it is a poster with the healthy living keywords on it. And both of those are very simple. The other benefit of this kind of thing is that any of you in this room who are actually going to face or have faced recently an inspection visit, it's quite interesting in secondary schools, if you watch teachers between lessons when the inspectors, you don't know whether they're going to come to your room or not. So you actually got your back to the door as one class has just gone out, you're waiting for another to arrive, and you're busily writing objectives on a white screen next to the main flip chart, next to the main interactive whiteboard. You're not supervising arrivals, you're not in charge. And actually, I've worked with teachers who know how either the magic whiteboard or the flip charts, one on top of the other during an inspection week. And as the one class leaves, they just peel the top layer off, and there's the objectives for lesson 2. And they're at the door greeting the students, come in, inspector, please take a seat, and you're actually in charge. But it's such a simple strategy. You don't need all the text. What, when, how, why, who. These are the kind of questions. And obviously the teacher will model that, okay, take people through a few examples. And there's the keywords which we're actually going to learn, and you can do retrieval practice tests and quizzes on the keywords to build the confidence. Now that's just some examples from principle 1. And there's actually 10 different ways of starting lessons. And it's basically on the website. Please download it free of charge, take it away with you. Now, the next one I'm looking at is principle 3, which is actually what we would call classroom management. Basically, it's the creation of the principle. And this actually is something all the research bodies I cited say is critical. And I as a head teacher taking over a struggling school, I can remember vividly that that's where we started, because we had to have routines. We had to be teachers. Teachers weren't using interesting and engaging activities because of behavior. So the interesting thing about it, principle 3, very, very important. So let's have the group activity. And it's interesting, you've got people not using groups in classes because of the lack of organization. It's not well structured. So if you look at what in the actual chapter, which will be available for you to download if you choose to, it's actually got 5 headings. And it basically starts off with the routines. It looks at questioning, okay, which is critical. It looks at the classroom layout. Forgive me, please, when I get to classroom layout, if you're an early years teacher, I do not think I could capture the brilliance of many early years classrooms in a picture. I've been into many, and the textures, the smells, the igloo in the corner, the washing lines across the ceiling. They're just wonderful rooms which you couldn't do justice to in a picture. So I haven't got an example from early years. Managing groups and behaviour, many of these are actually critical for effective learning. So if you look at the routines, now such as arrival, what I'm actually going to do here is just show you an example of a maths teacher that I actually visited in, if I can find it. I'll leave it actually, because it's actually, I've closed the software down, forgive me. It was actually on a Promethean whiteboard. If anyone's got Promethean, there's something called ticker tape. It's instructions going across the top of the screen. And what this maths teacher had was actually an image of the goal scorers in the, I think it was 2010, 2011 in the Premier League. And they had both goals scored, okay, and goals created. And the instructions at the top of the cross of the screen said, please find me the mean, the mode, and the modem. And interestingly, the students didn't speak when they came in, they just sat down and started. That was their routine. You don't wait for me to say anything. You come in and you sit down and you answer the questions. I've got one with actually a design and technology classroom, which is a photograph or an image of a food technology room where there's probably 20 different hazards in the room. It just says find the hazards. I've got one of the foreign language one, which is a street scene, all the names of the streets there. At the bottom of the screen, it says you are here, and it points to where you are. And it says in French across the top of the screen, what is the building, the third building on the left? Next question says, what is the building opposite La Banque? And interestingly, the students, once again, their routines, they come in and they start. This is our arrival act. The other things that you need to get right is ethos. So start as you mean to go on. You never, ever allow students, okay, to use put down sarcasm. Okay, we trust each other and we trust the peers. We have empathy towards children who have disabilities or learning problems. We also have empathy towards people from different faiths and cultures. All of these ground rules, I can't list them because whether you teach 3-year-olds or whether you teach A-level or post-16 adults, the ground rules will be different. In other words, the ground rules becomes a principle, but the strategy you use will differ on who you teach, what subject. So the ground rules, for example, in design and technology would include and science would include an awful lot of health and safety issues. The rival routines, I don't know whether you've actually come across this or not, ladies and gentlemen, but when I was a teacher, I remember vividly there's two kinds of students when you get to questioning. There's the volunteers, the ones you can rely on, the ones you take aside the day before the inspectors arrive and say, you are here tomorrow, aren't you? Because you know they'll answer. The others are the conscripts, the ones who only speak when you pick on them, when you actually say, what do you think, Darren? And actually they have to answer. And Darren breathes a sigh of relief because that's his contribution for the month over.
All right. Who knows where this Farquaad guy is? Oh, I do. I know where he is. Does anyone else know where to find him? Anyone at all? Me. Anyone? Oh, pick me. Oh, I know.
That's the volunteers. Now, the interesting thing about that is we all recognise those students, but we've got to get others. Now, in the actual chapter in my website for Principle 3, there's loads of different questioning techniques. Most of these here, okay, will be familiar to you, so I'm not going to go through those. I'm just going to share with you a couple of others that you may not be aware of. First of all, this is actually called answer and pass. And the important thing about this is the teacher selects the student who's going to answer and then asks another one to comment. And they've got to comment on the pupil A's response before they give their own. So it's interesting, you actually then just pass it around the room. So interesting. Question posters. If you look at these question posters, they're based on blooms, they're on the walls. And in this activity, you get students in groups and you ask the students in groups to create questions for other groups. And because you've got the actual the questions in posters on the wall, they're going to start going for the harder, difficult questions. They enjoy doing that. So that's questioning posters. Okay, question time. This is my favorite. I've never seen it fail. It's actually that we'll blow an inspector out of the water on the do this. You organize the class into small groups of probably about 4, and you say to them, you're actually going to be the experts on this. Supposing you give the scenario that we're actually doing healthy eating, and we've got one group of experts who are nutritionists. You say to them, you've got nutritionists, you know everything about it. You've come to this village hall today to take questions from the villagers. So everyone else, please, in groups, question for our nutritionists. Now, the rule is they can't ask the question unless they can answer it. So all the groups spend 5 minutes maybe coming up with a question for our experts and having to work out the answer before they ask the question. And the wonderful thing about this is it actually almost certainly creates the hardest possible question they can. Pass the question is a variation on this, and I'll just show you how this works. I saw my head of maths doing this. He called me, asked me to go and watch him do. He became the principal eventually at the school I left. An interesting Mark said, I'm actually asking you everybody, please, to set a question based on area, which is what we've been working on with the class, please, for someone else to answer. And it was actually a year 7 class. And he actually gave a piece of paper like this with a question at the top. Put your problem on here, please, and then put your solution at the bottom. So every pair of students had to create a problem for another pair. And when he looked at the question, said, I like that, it's a really good question. He ripped the top half off with the question on it and took it to the right pair, because depending on how difficult this was, he gave it to another pair of students. And if it was a really difficult problem, he gave it to 2 of the more confident students. Now, the one on this here is actually taught 2 girls did. They were doing area rectangles, but they decided to do different shapes. So they said, how much turf would you need for this garden? And the dimensions are on that. The 2 boys who were given this actually said, Mr. Stanier, this is hard. Who did this? And he said, those 2 over there. Can we do one for them, please? And they then drew a picture of a bedroom wall and said, how much wallpaper will you need? How many rolls of wallpaper do you need for this wall? And because they actually had the difficulty of the grass, they actually put 2 cupboards, a door, and 3 round windows in the actual problem. So that made it more difficult. So that's actually what happens. Now, traditional layout, I'm just going to just show you a couple here. If you actually think about your classroom layout and you want to use a traditional layout, there's no problems with that. I have no objections to traditional layouts. A lot of teachers use visuals at the front, like modern language teachers, for example. And interesting. Now, what I'm showing you here is not taking into account COVID, because the COVID rules in secondary schools now with many schools is that you can't leave your desk. But I'm just going to show you, for normal times, if you wanted to actually use this traditional layout and you wanted to move into small groups for discussion, very simply turn your chairs around and face the 2 behind. But be careful on the selection of who sits where, because otherwise you could end up, if it's random, with a group from hell, which you don't want. But interesting, that's one. Now, the one I also like is this one. It's called a cabaret, and you've chosen the 4s. 2 students here on this top corner are very able, very clever, very confident students, and opposite are 2 friends who are actually less confident. But the 4 of them get on okay. That is a wonderful, what I call a support group. Now, sometimes they just collaborate. They can brainstorm together, for example. Sometimes they pass the question to each other that way, and other times they're doing peer tutoring across the table. So choosing groups. Now notice there's nobody on the front edge. Very, very important to me that you never talk to the back of a head. I've watched lessons galore around the country, and I see teachers talking to students facing the other way. So it's interesting that actually the cabaret. Managing groups. Most of you, I'm sure, have come across the small group where 1 person does it and 3 do very little. The interesting thing about that is actually a little slip of paper like this, as they brainstorm, Amanda comes up with the idea of women's pay, discrimination to do with women and their pay. Carl came up with the idea of number of percentage of women in senior management and so on. And Juan, the issue of maternity rights. Now, the beauty of that is not only do they come up with the ideas, but we know whose idea it was. And when you use that, it's interesting how many people want their name on each list. When you're doing planning, say a presentation, a 6th form group going away to plan a presentation, who's going to do what, when, by, please? And I'll sign you off when your plan is, I'm happy with it. So once again, a little bit more managing of groups. In this activity, I actually watched a disaster of a lesson with 6 students. Okay, they were in groups of 6 watching a video about the European Union. And the teacher said, watch this, make notes, and we'll have a question and answer session. And when we got to the question and answer, not one person spoke. The video was too fast, it's too much information, and they didn't have the skills of writing shorthand notes. I actually said, let's do it differently this afternoon with a different class. I gave each of the students a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Number 1s, please. There's 2 things on the video you've got to find. Number 2s, there's your 2 questions. And when they watched it, the concentration levels were amazing. Now that will work for most subjects, most ages, where they have to find out something, but they're responsible for that bit. Okay, so that's interesting. The jigsaw activity, fabulous activity, mixed ability group of 4. There's a range of ability in that group. And then you give them 4 different tasks, and they vary in difficulty level. And obviously the most able students doing the most difficult task, and so on. Now, when you actually get them to do the research on this task, all the A's from one group meet together. So there's 4 in this class of 16, there's 4 doing the A together, 4 doing the B, 4 doing the C, 4 doing the D. The teacher can now join each of these groups in stage 2, challenge them, support them, whereas there you'd be helping 4 individuals. And in stage 3, when they've done their work, they go back to their original group, okay, and teach them what they focused. And during that time, the groups change into focus groups. So that's another one. And this one here, variety of functions, support groups. If you have a support group, the beauty of that group there, 2 more able, 2 less confident, is when the teacher says, are you all clear? As teachers often do, the interesting thing is everyone nods. And there's 3 different groups nodding. One's nodding because they're clear, one's nodding because they think they're clear, and a 3rd group's nodding because they're not clear. And the reason is, the interesting thing is you need to actually think about how we can actually get over that in a different way. And if you said, right, everybody, that's the work you've got to do, join your support group. If you've got questions, discuss it in the group, please. And sometimes the problem one student had is sorted by the group. And if not, if no one can sort it, the chair of the group says, Mr. Powell, we'd like to know. So support groups, fabulous for getting clarity before a task begins. Now, if you go to the evidence space, okay, there's the Endowment Foundation on behaviour. That's what they say. And the only thing I'm going to, you don't need me on behaviour, go to the experts on it, okay. And interestingly, that my view about this is that SLT must recognise that don't blame the teachers if there's poor behaviour. Yes, there are some teachers who don't engage youngsters, they don't really use proper classroom management. So the CPD must help them on that. But the important thing is, as a partnership, it is my strong view that teachers respond to CPD by saying, I'm going to improve my classroom management, I'm going to improve my learning activities, but I want you to help me if there's a problem. There's nothing worse than a child being abusive, being sent to a senior manager and coming back in 5 minutes later smirking all over their faces. So we must have a partnership between managers and teachers to tackle behaviour. The one I will share with you, I recommend this hugely, is I work with one special needs team in Liverpool where we actually developed 20 different expectations for behaviour. This is what good behaviour is. I arrive on time, I have correct equipment, and so on. You take 20 of those, put that as a huge poster on the wall, several walls in the room. And if you do it across a whole department or a whole team, you end up then, and if a child misbehaves, you can actually say, what does B1 say? I arrive on time, why are you late? So interestingly, you define what, now that actually could be converted into a Sims activity where you record these and pick up patterns about which students are doing the same thing lesson after lesson. All of those basic examples, okay, are published now on the classroom management thing. Now I'm going to show you very briefly, we only got a few minutes left, but I'm going to take you through the principles how to plan a unit in the way I've described. If you've actually got using PowerPoint and images, I've shown you that one. If you ask the questions, if you're actually going to model criteria, which you will do, if you're going to use the jigsaw, if you're going to actually have a scaffold to do research, okay, ongoing review, I haven't mentioned that yet. It's one of the other principles which says review isn't simply at the end of the lesson, it's throughout the lesson. You get feedback during the lesson and respond to it. You intervene, you pause the lesson, you reteach, all kinds of things. Feedback from the groups. In the suggestion here is the students actually get into small groups after doing drafts of their research on endangered animals, and they actually then have to actually evaluate against the criteria their friends' work and see if they can improve it. When they work on personal targets, there's actually a skills poster up on the wall that says, I'm actually got to use paragraphs, I've actually got to use speech marks. So you actually got personal targets where they build in. If they're doing oral presentations, okay, that's actually principle 7, which is actually to do with working independently and actually showing metacognition, because you're planning, it's your work, and that and so on. Self-assessment and peer assessment come into review as well. Now that's actually this, so you actually go through it, and the sorts of things you produce as a team. And I work with a team on this endangered animals. One's a geography team, okay, and interestingly there was a scaffold to go with the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint. I'm going to show you the pictures now, but rather than playing it all. Fabulous photographs. And the question the students have to answer for all of them, which of these animals are fine, which animals are threatened, and which animals are facing extinction. And the beauty of that was actually produced by the team. One person found the images and produced the music and so on. This was actually produced by the team, teamwork. So the team actually worked on the criteria for this, working towards working out or working at greater depth. They actually produced the key words. Just an idea, by the way, for you. This will be lots of staff doing this already, but this is one person saying, I'll do the key words. It was the team planning. Is an idea you might like. Is actually, there's actually a publications company in Cornwall called Cutting Edge Publications. They're absolutely fabulous. I bought everything they produced for our special needs team when I was ahead. And what he did, he produced this activity where the students get scores for the interesting vocabulary they use. So interestingly, if you were doing this in this topic, you'd actually get students using the more high scoring words. I did it with another school, was doing a haunted house activity. When they came to do their writing, they were actually using the scores here. And I worked with a French department, excuse me, I'll put it back up again, okay, where they actually were using the same kind of idea. Okay, so these sorts of ideas actually engage students very quickly towards the end now. The beauty of all of this is that all of these scaffolds and so on, that scaffold for the jigsaw group research was done by the team. Okay, moving on, that was actually done by the team as a team. This one was actually reading comprehension. Excuse me, moving on to that. Another actually was using, one other group was actually when they present their drafts of their research, they were using a visualizer so that everybody could see it and they were making comments on it. So this was actually in the feedback principle number 8. There's the criteria, and very quickly, this is actually the skills log I told you about earlier. So the students add to the, I'm going to use paragraphs, I'm going to use speech marks. So these are actually, once again, very quick ways of actually adding a target for an individual. Now I very quickly want to go to the end now because we're reaching our hour, and I haven't yet shown you what to do is if you like these ideas. First of all, you've got to sell it. Many people on this will actually be classroom teachers with no influence at all. You've got to sell it to SLT, and I've done it with a few SLTs, and I've only had 40 minutes with the SLT, and they go for it. Basically, agree evidence-based principles. So you do that involving the staff and governors. Once the school agrees its principles, okay, it must be your principles. Mine can be used if you choose, but actually you own it. It's very important. Teams meet and agree the strategies. So this is where the menu arrives. You create the menu of strategies for each principle, not just my ideas, but there's hundreds of ideas I haven't mentioned tonight that you use that will go into that menu. You use keywords for that menu. So for example, jigsaw is a key word. You don't need any more detail because we all know what a jigsaw is. And you actually publish a lexicon of keywords and terms like jigsaw, explaining what they mean. and then you can plan the lesson on the back of the envelope, like I said. And if you actually look at an example of a team menu, principle 1, there's the evidence in the middle, and those are the ones we're going to use. Now you might come up with your own list of strategies there, and then you'd actually have the lexicon, answer the questions, and you describe what that means. Now that actually means we can just use answer the questions on our back of the envelope. Okay, there's another idea I haven't shared with you yet. It's many schools have to go for schemes of work and then lesson plans. And in this school I work with them, we actually produced a scheme of learning. We took from the scheme of work what it was they had to learn. So that's there on page 1. On page 2, the team worked on this. We worked together for a morning, 5 of us, and we actually produced a scheme. And it's 4 lessons. And interestingly, the objectives are down there, the intentions are down here. And there's this is each of the 4 lessons. There's the resources we're going to need for each lesson. There's the type of assessment taking place during each lesson. And there's the skills. Do you know why that's so useful? It's because if a visitor comes in halfway through, like an inspector, and says, well, there wasn't any group work, they can actually see from this that actually it's tomorrow, because they see the whole picture. That arrow moves up and down for a visitor to see where you are in that scheme. So that's the scheme of learning. And the team produced, one of them produced a map, another one produced the actual scaffold, another one produced a homework activity. So what you were creating was a team approach. And I'm actually going to finish there because I'm totally convinced about this concept of principles. Basic idea, if you agree principles, the methods that you choose to deliver those principles free the teacher from a straitjacket, allow you to actually use ideas that actually engage the children, and actually you meet the rigor of the principle, but through the creativity of the teacher. And if you actually at any point want to contact me, please, there's my website, and basically all the principles 1 and 3 are published at the moment. They're on my website, but 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be available for download during the next couple of months, because I'm working on them progressively as we go. So thank you for being there tonight. I hope you found it useful. And I'm just going to hand back now to the references are on there as well, but I'm handing back now, please, to Gary and to Lydia. Here we are.
Go back a bit, Rob. Keep going, keep going. Keep going. There we go. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
Avril?
Avril, sorry.
I think she's having some technical issues. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Robert.
Yes, so just want to say a massive thank you to Robert.
Thank you, that's very kind of you. I'm sorry it was so quick at the end, but we were running short of time. You still there, Avril?
I think there's just a bit of a delay with Avril's internet. I know she's had trouble tonight, so I'll just finish it off. It's fine. So thanks, Robert, for having us. I'll put the link in the chat and we will send out the PowerPoint. Thank you to Elementary Technology as always. They support these webinars and they provide us with the software to use, the Zoom software, and give us lots and lots of prizes every time. And thank you this time to Twinkle. Some of you may use Twinkle, especially in lockdown stuff. They did some fantastic resources for lockdown, and they do some amazing ones for all years. And they've donated some prizes tonight as well for us. So in the last webinar, we had a couple of prizes we gave away, and you can see on the screen there were the winners of the different prizes that we gave away. Well done to Fiona Dixon. I'm very jealous of a visualizer that you managed to win. So I think Fiona's signed up tonight. I don't know if she's live tonight or she's watching it afterwards, but well done to all those people. We do always like to do competitions in our webinars. And again, Elementary Technology are giving away 2 times £25 Amazon credit. So if we draw your name out, if you fill in the feedback form, we draw your name out, then we will just ask you what you want to spend it on, and then we'll pay for it and get it sent to your address. We've also got some coveted TNT teaching and learning mugs, and we're giving one of those away tonight. Not many people have those, so you'll be unique. You'll be able to water in your school and say, look at my new mug. They do look really cool. And again, thanks to Elementary for sorting those out for us. And then Twinkle have kindly donated 2 12-month premium subscriptions. So all you have to do is go onto the Google form, and when you leave this webinar, it should automatically load up, but we will send it out on the email as well. And I will put it in the chat in a couple of minutes. Close on Wednesday the 31st at 3:30, and then we'll announce the winners a week after. So again, you can join our Facebook group, and where we always promote our webinars. We're on Twitter, and also check out all the other webinars and past stuff that we've done. And there's loads of resources on there. We're just trying to build more and more. So check out our YouTube as well. Myself, Avril, and Tanya, some of you may have seen Tanya from a webinar we did last year. We do host on a brand new teacher radio station called Teacher Hug Radio Station. It's online, and you can see the address up there, teacherhug.co.uk. It's every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and there's some amazing shows on there from loads of different presenters, teachers across the UK, and loads of amazing guests and interviews and fun and all sorts of stuff. So get on there, and Robert's going to be coming back on the radio. He's going to be talking to us about feedback and marking on the radio show. It's a live Q&A phone-in show. So if you want to join us, that's in 2 weeks' time on Sunday the 26th at 8 o'clock. Next one, Rob. And then Q&A. What if you've got any questions in now, just put them in there. And what we'll do on our radio show in 2 weeks' time, we'll ask Rob to answer some of those. But also, if you want to email us any questions afterwards, once we've sent the PowerPoint out, then I will forward them on to Robert, and he'll get in touch with you as well. But thank you very much, everyone, for giving up your Thursday. Apologies, we ran over a little bit. We are doing a recording of this, and we will post it out, a link to the video via email if you signed up, which most of you will have. And then also we're putting on our YouTube channel. That'll probably be the next few days. If you do want a certificate for the webinar, then please just email us at that email address, and we'll get those sent out as soon as possible. Obviously, myself and Avril are full-time working teachers, so we try our best to get that stuff out to you pretty quick and pretty rapid. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully you found it useful. I'm just going to post the link to the form now in the chat. There we go. You should anyway when you leave. So there's the feedback form if you want to enter the competitions. Really appreciate all your feedback to make these webinars possible. So thanks very much. Thank you, Avril, for joining us. I know you're probably hearing us about 2 minutes later. Thank you very much, Rob, again. And thank you to everyone for giving up the time. And hopefully you found useful and things to help you in your own teams. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Avril. Thanks, Rob.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.